Hey there. Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Sonification Generative Music, Future of Generative Music panel here, or Conscious Conversation. I'm here with Sarah Kane. Hello, Sarah.
Hello, excited to be here.
Yeah, so today we're going to talk about different ways of translating data into music, different practices, some of the value that sonification can provide, and the different approaches and the different ways that we come through. So, just as an intro of myself, my name is Joe Patitucci. I'm CEO of Data Garden. We design data sonification systems, one of which you may have experienced here called PlantWave. It's a device that translates plant data into music. And so you can check it out over there at 1545 down here in the expo hall. And then also upstairs in 11B, we have a plant music zone, which is plant music lounge, which has multiple plants all connected to PlantWaves. It's a really immersive, chill space to go and relax. And it really showcases the power of sonification. So yeah, that's my intro, and then we have Sarah Kane. And so, Sarah, would you like to introduce yourself?
So yeah, my name is Sarah. I am a fourth-year undergraduate studying astrophysics at the University of Pennsylvania. I'm primarily interested in how we can use the current structure and status of the Milky Way to understand the formation history of the galaxy. But I am also legally blind, and so I'm really interested in this emerging field of sonification. How can we represent astronomical data as sound, both to make it more accessible to people like me who are blind and visually impaired, but also to make it more usable or enjoyable to sighted people too. I will be starting my PhD at the University of Cambridge next year in astronomy as a Marshall Scholar selected by the British government.
Wonderful. So I think we can start first by giving some. We'll first start just by defining sonification. So sonification is a way of taking non-audio data and representing it as audio. So it can sound musical. It also can sound like noise. There are lots of ways of doing data sonification. You can think of it similar to like a weather map. A weather map is data visualization. We're all familiar with that. Similarly, we're taking information and then we're making it sound. Is there anything, did I miss anything there?
I think one of the things I like to emphasize with sonification is that it's just a different way of representing data or ideas. So, because sighted people, most humans are inherently visual, it feels very instinctive to represent things visually. Think about a line chart, a bar graph. These things might feel like instinctively natural ways to represent data, but there's no reason that same data cannot be represented in sound instead. So I think that gives us good sort of framework with which to think about sonification, that it's not necessarily an alternative to some natural form, it's just another option that we have.
Yeah, that's a great point. One of the things I really love about sonification, and this kind of comes from studying film and stuff in college, is I remember my one professor would always say when we'd be creating films, he'd always say, start with the audio, because the audio is the way you're going to tell the story, whether or not someone's looking at the screen or whether they're paying attention, and you can kind of build the images on top of it. What I really appreciate about sonification, even for sighted people, is that it's a way of monitoring data without having to pay direct visual attention to it. And that can be really powerful, especially if you're monitoring some kind of system that maybe only has an anomaly happen once every couple hours. You don't want to be staring at a screen the whole time or something. So yeah, it has that benefit as well.
Yeah, I love that you brought that up because, I'm talking about a lot of these sonification ideas from the perspective of a blind person. But there is all sorts of upcoming research suggesting that, as you said, sighted people benefit immensely from sonification. There's a paper from 2014 saying that doctors understand EEG, so heart scan data, better when they have it sonified. It's more intuitive. There have been a recent slew of NASA papers suggesting that, or not NASA, of Nature papers suggesting that sighted people can understand data better when they have both the sonification and the visualization. And this all comes back to this idea of universal design, this concept that when you make things that are accessible for disabled people, so in this case blind people, you're actually just making things better for everyone involved. So I think this is a sort of perfect example of that. In some circles, sonification arises initially for blind people, but then we start to see it actually helps everyone.
Yeah, it's a great point. There are lots of different ways people learn, different ways people absorb information, and different ways that our sensory system is connected to aspects of our brain. So if you think of the visual, the visual stimulation is more related to like the prefrontal cortex, way more intellectual in a way. Whereas I think you use the word intuitive there when you were talking about sonification. And that makes a lot of sense because sound is more connected to the emotional and the feeling centers of our system. So it can also be a really powerful tool in terms of, like, it's like a direct connection to our nervous system in terms of how we're feeling, and we'll get into that a little bit too. That plays into how we design for sonification as well. But let's have a look or listen at some different examples of sonification. We could start maybe with we'll start with the plant. I don't know how many of you have checked out the PlantMusic Lounge today, or at all this whole time. Okay, we got some folks. I highly recommend checking that out. Definitely. Here's some plant music. So it has like a little pad and a little bass and maybe a little. Oh. So what you're hearing there is a plant. I think it's an orchid actually, connected to a PlantWave. And so you're hearing changes in conductivity through a plant represented as music. It's mostly changes in water content, graphing that as a wave and translating into pitch. And so each instrument you hear is actually being controlled by the same data. It's just being represented at different resolutions. So the bass is allowed to be triggered like once every 10 seconds, whereas that little staccato beepy thing is allowed to be triggered more often. So you're getting a higher resolution of like the quote-unquote image of the wave from the staccato sound than you are from the flute or the bass. So that's one example of data sonification, and yeah, you can check that out with PlantWave. And then we're gonna have a look, I believe, and a listen to some of the space sonification that we have.
Yeah, so I've picked out some sonifications from NASA's Universe of Sound. This is an incredible sonification project headed by Kim Arcand and Matt Russo. So I've picked out a couple. I don't know if we'll listen to all of them, but we have both the visualization. So this is probably what you're more familiar with if you've seen telescope images before. There are these really beautiful images of astronomical objects. And we'll see sort of a visual representation of how the scientists are turning this data into sound. So maybe we will start with the galactic center. So this is a visualization, so an image and a sonification of the image of our galactic center. in this sonification, those little twinkling noises you hear, the sort of compact notes, those are stars, or what we call compact sources. Those become individual notes. And then those more extended sounds, those are like the clouds of gas. What you see is the more sort of, for lack of better phrasing, blurred parts of the image. You might have heard a bit of a crescendo towards the end of it. When we hit the right side of the image, that is actually the supermassive black hole at the center of our galaxy, Sagittarius A star, that you hear is that sort of crescendo of notes. In this particular sonification, the scientists chose to pan from left to right along the image, with higher pitches representing light at higher points of the image and lower pitches being lower points on the image, to sort of give us that full 2D picture. And then how loud the noise is corresponds to the intensity of light, or how much light we're getting, how bright it is. And in that way, the scientists are trying to capture all aspects of the visualization in the sonification as well.
Amazing. And so what is that? How has sonification changed your way of seeing like space data? Because I know that my understanding is like that you got into sonification kind of like through this. Maybe you can tell us a little bit about how you got into it, and then what it's meant for you.
Yeah, so I stumbled into the world of sonification completely by accident. I was doing my first ever research project. I had just finished my freshman year of college, and I was looking at something called exoplanet transits, which are when planets pass in between us and their host star, and we see these little blips in how bright the star looks to us because the planet keeps blocking some of the light. And I was trying to get some data that was hosted by, it was from a NASA telescope hosted by the Space Telescope Science Institute. And because I was a freshman, I was very confused. I was very lost. I didn't know what I was doing. So I tried to find someone at the Space Telescope Science Institute to ask for help. And then I happened to see in his bio that he's the project lead for something called Astronify, which was a project that tries to turn the type of data that I was working with into sound. And I couldn't believe it. So I send him this email, first with my questions, whatever. I was confused. And then I go, by the way, I saw that you're the head of this project, Astronify, and I'm blind, and I would love to do anything at all to help with this project. And they were very welcoming. They let me, be a usability tester for them. And things sort of snowballed from there. I got more and more involved in sonification. I heard about projects like this one from the Universe of Sound. And it means a lot of things to me. I think there's a lot of potential in sonification to be a real research tool for people like me, to be a scientific tool that I would use in my day-to-day life when I'm doing data analysis. Are we quite there? Not yet. I think we're still in the beginning stages of sonification as a scientific tool. But even more than that, it shows me that people care. People care about inclusion. People care about making things accessible to blind people. Before I got into sonification, I really thought that I was the only blind astronomer in the world, and that I was going to have to be the first one to figure out how to do things and how things worked, and that I was alone and that no one would care about making things accessible. And if you'll pardon the pun, sonification opened my eyes to the fact that people do care about accessibility in science, and that caring about that accessibility makes things better for sighted people too.
100%. Yeah, that's. Oh wow, thank you for that. Yeah, there's a lot of evidence that when we remove kind of one way of absorbing information, we can go deeper into another, and I'm sure that I would imagine that your attunement to listening is much deeper than most people's, as it's true for a lot of musicians and people that have to prioritize one sense over another. We kind of get get into that space. So yeah, it's not just for it's for everyone. It's really sonification has a lot of power. And so when you're listening to something like we just heard, what are you comparing? I'd imagine you're comparing, this image to that image. Like, what are some of the things that you're listening for?
Yeah, so what's interesting about the world of astronomy sonification as it stands right now is that there are roughly 2, maybe 3 classes of sonifications. And this is true of actually visualizations too. So there are sonifications and visualizations for education and public outreach, and then there are, the visualizations and sonifications for research tools. If you have seen, for instance, the beautiful images from the James Webb Telescope recently, that's not necessarily what images in astro papers look like. I'm sorry to say they're not the same sort of beautiful. So when I'm listening to something like this, which is material made for outreach, I am chasing that sense of awe that drew me, and I think a lot of other people, to astronomy. That sense of wonder, the sense of smallness in the face of the universe. So I don't want to discount the fact that the sonification is just beautiful, and that is an end unto itself, because that is what inspires people to study astronomy, to study other sciences. If I'm listening, for instance, to a sonification of data, for instance, something like Astronify, which still sounds very cool and is lovely to listen to, but is a very different sort of tool, then I might be listening for changes in the data. Where do I hear changes in pitch that could correspond to changes in how bright a star looks? What could that say? Does it mean the star is getting brighter? Could it be like a flare on the surface of the star? Or is it a dip in the brightness of the star? Could that be a planet passing in front? So depending on what the goal is of our sonification, we could be listening for very different things.
And is there a way to delineate between whether it's a flare or whether it's a planet? Because it sounds like what you're looking for in that situation is kind of like the delta, or there's like a big change. So is there any way of indicating the direction of change, whether it's light or dark, or density of whatever the body is?
Yeah, so this is a great question, and this is something we think about a lot in the astronomical sonification community. How do we standardize what these changes in pitch mean so that it's an intuitive sort of process? So if we're talking about these flares versus transits, these brighter changes versus darker changes, the type of data we're looking at is something called a light curve, which is a measure of how bright the star is as a function of time. It literally just looks like a line graph that goes up and down as the star looks brighter and dimmer to us here on Earth. And a sonification of that data would just sort of pan along time. So, you hear the line as sound, where higher points in the line graph are higher pitches and lower points in the line graph are lower pitches. And that makes it quite intuitive to hear the difference between a flare versus a transit, because in a flare you hear this sudden whir of of higher pitches, whereas in a transit you hear a dip into lower pitches.
Cool. All right, that makes a lot of sense. And so this is all being done. So it's similar in terms of like with PlantWave and making plant music. We're following this wave that we're getting from the plant. That's basically changes in impedance, graphed over time in real time. And so when the conductivity goes up, when there's like more water between the 2 points, the notes go up. When it goes down, they go down. And then the delta kind of thing comes into play as well. So how quickly it changes will result in different effects being applied. Maybe if it changes quickly, the pacing of the notes may increase, or if it decreases, pacing could go down. So that is, and that's all done in real time. And because PlantWave is done in real time, one of the challenges that we have to deal with is that, well, I'll start with astronomical data, especially when you're dealing with an image and you're sonifying the image, you kind of know what the maximum and minimum values will be, right? Because it's all there in front of you. It already exists.
Yeah.
With plant sonification, one of the challenges is that it's changing all the time. You kind of think you know what the baseline is. You know about what the range of data is that you're going to get. But you have that thing hooked up for a few days, and before you know it, it's way out of there. And if you had it as a direct sonification of tone, like you would do it in an image, what would end up happening is that at a certain point, the notes would go outside of the audible range. So one of the things that we have to do with real-time sonification is do some way of either measuring and recalibrating the system, or do like what we do with PlantWave, which is we actually wrap the notes. So we'll have a set range that the plant's allowed to play, and then when it hits a certain point, then it just has to wrap back down under. I'm wondering like what kind of design challenges appear on the sonification of space data side.
That's incredible. So I had never thought about the challenges of live sonification. I'm over here complaining about standardizing sonifications of data we already have instead of dealing with an ever-changing data set. So that was very interesting to hear about. I suppose the challenge of astronomical sonification is that there are so many different types of data, so many different types of visualization. And it becomes a challenge to find the most intuitive sonification when you have 100, 1,000 different plots that are wildly different. So for instance, what we just listened to in the galactic center is a sonification where we pan from left to right, and how high or low the pitch is corresponds to how high we are on the plot, whether we're in the top or the bottom part of the plot, and then the volume corresponds to how much light we're getting. But we could look at just an image, so not even a different type of plot, but still just a picture of a very different object. I'm going to ask you to pull up the Cassiopeia A sonification in a second, please. We have still an image of an object, just a different object, and the method we use to sonify the data already has to be wildly different because the image is so different. So if you could play the Cass A sonification. So this is a sonification of Cassiopeia A, which is a supernova remnant, the remnant of a star that died explosively. And as you can see, it's roughly circular-ish in a way that the galactic center image didn't look. And this means that it makes much more sense to sort of scan out from the center of the image rather than panning from left to right, as we did before. And since we're moving out from the center, it no longer makes sense to have pitch correspond to whether we're hearing noise from the top or the bottom of the image. So now the different pitches or the different instruments you're hearing are actually mapped to the different elements you can see in that graph. You can't see the elements, but the elements that astronomers know are there. So that's like calcium and silicon and iron, remnants of this supernova. So each instrument you hear sort of in that chorus is mapping how much of that element is at the point of the image where we are currently sonifying.
Okay, wow. So there are just many different ways that one would sonify, and when you're doing research or when you're checking out these different images, is it common for the different practices to all be available? Like, is it kind of like visually it would be like a histogram or something, and you say like, oh, I'm looking at these certain things. But can you look at do they normally provide the image as a sonification in multiple ways?
Yeah, so this is a really interesting thing in astronomy, and I think one of the most common misconceptions about astronomy. Growing up, I would often hear, how in the world are you going to be an astronomer? You can't see through a telescope. Most astronomers don't look through telescopes, and in fact, most of us don't look at images either, not in the same way. So for instance, in my research, I unfortunately never actually get to look at those pretty pictures. That's not really what my research looks like. Instead, it's, many, many line graphs or, other types of bizarre and unusual plots. And one of the challenges of being a blind person in astronomy is that there are not sonifications available for all of these different plots we have. So Astronify, which I've talked about, is a sonification of one very specific type of plot, a light curve, and it works really well at that, but suddenly you move to a slightly different graph and it no longer works. So it's a really great question of, are all of these sonifications available? And the answer is not yet, but I hope, someday, yes, I think people are working towards that.
Got it. And it sounds like there isn't yet really a standardized way of sonifying, or there aren't necessarily like named types of sonification where one could. Yeah, sounds like there's a lot of opportunity there, and maybe, I don't know, we have a pretty cool real-time sonification engine. Maybe we could plug it in one of these days and let it rip. That's really cool. So one of the things I'm hearing from you is the way that you're doing research is, astronomers aren't necessarily looking at pretty pictures all day, right? Or just staring into telescopes, listening to planetarium music. But one of the things that I find interesting is, and that people might not know, is a lot of these images you're talking about, some of these things are meant to be more internal for scientific research, and some of them are more for outreach. So those images that we see of galaxies and all these things are like, how true to the visual are they, and how much interpretation is done in that space, on the visual space? Is that something that maybe most people aren't aware of?
That's an excellent question, and something I was really hoping to get to talk about, because I think this really hammers home how sonification is no less intuitive, no less natural than visualization. So you probably, again, I'm going to talk about James Webb because it's, shiny new toy. Maybe you saw those incredible pictures from James Webb that came out this summer. And it's easy to think that those are just, like pointing a camera and taking a picture. But in reality, a lot of telescopes are actually looking at light that we cannot see. So our eyes, if they work better than mine, can only see a very, very narrow, little tiny strip of the electromagnetic spectrum of all the light that's out there. So a lot of telescopes, like James Webb, which looks at infrared light, I believe, are not looking at light that we can see. So anytime you see an image from James Webb, there has to be some interpretation there in terms of how do we translate this light we can't see into light we can see. And I'm no expert in that process, but I think it's pretty faithful to the the actual data. That's a primary goal there. I won't claim to be an expert in that process, but because when we have this light we can't see, we are already translating it into something we can see. It's already a change from the original. That's something I like to emphasize, that sonification is just a different sort of translation. We are still taking something we can't see naturally and making it into a form that we can see or hear naturally.
Totally. So do you mean that the galaxy doesn't sound like celestial flutes? Is that what you're saying?
Bummer. Yeah, I know. That's something I get asked a lot. Like, how can you hear something in space? Especially a lot of these like black hole mergers are represented as sound, like a really cool chirp noise. I don't know if any of you have heard that. And one of the questions we get a lot is like, how do you hear anything if space is vacuum? We're not hearing anything. We are representing some data we're getting as sound. It is a representation of something we observe, just as an image is a representation of something we observe. It's not literally music from the stars. It's more music of the stars that we're making.
Exactly. Yeah, that's an important point. With PlantWave, we get a lot of, sometimes people are angry on the internet. That some people like doing that. That's a hobby. And they'll in all caps, like, plants don't sound like flutes. And it's like, oh, okay, yeah, no, but they can control. We can represent the data from plants with flutes, so that we can hear these changes that are happening. It's just really important to note that this is sonification is a way of representing this information to humans in a relatable way, and. Yeah, a lot of what we see out there, even in the visual land, is in some ways a translation as well. And that doesn't make it any more or less real. Let's be clear about that, because what it is it's a tool. We're expanding our ability to perceive outside of the apparatus we've been given as humans. And for instance, plants are able to absorb light and respond to light that's outside of our visible light spectrum. And so if we're able to listen to plants as they're responding to changes in their environment, then in a way we are opening our ears to be able to see with the leaves of a plant. And there are lots more applications we can get into. But do you have anything else to add to that?
No, I think you put that very well. I think, as you were saying, one of the things, and I know I've said this already, but one of the things I just always want to emphasize with sonification is that it's just a different way to represent data. It's just another way to do the same thing.
Sure. And so a lot of people might get into astronomy. I love Carl Sagan. I used to just go to sleep listening to the Cosmos series like every night. Like, atoms as massive as suns, universe is smaller than atoms, and I just blissed out into space. And I wonder, I think a lot of people that are into astronomy and into space, they get pulled in through the wonder of images and things like that. How is that for you in terms of, is the sonification doing it for you? Like, when you hear the sonification of space, does it bring you into this feeling of this sense of wonder and awe and like good vibes?
I definitely think it does for me. I think my inspiration to get into astronomy was a little different from a lot of sighted astronomers. People will talk about looking up at the night sky or watching these documentaries and whatnot. And a lot of those things weren't, accessible to me. And so I got into astronomy because I watched a lot of Star Trek. But, in the past few years, as I've gotten into sonification and I've heard these images, I guess, I feel that sense of wonder, and that I can get a sense of the beauty that other people are able to see. And it makes me think of, the next little blind kid who wants to be an astronomer, and who will hear that and be able to get that sense of wonder from something real, from, real data. This is the sound that we use to represent real astronomy, and not just a TV show, as good as it might be. So I definitely get that sense of wonder. And I'm excited for a new generation of blind people to get to experience it at a younger age than I did, and hopefully to inspire, more blind astronomers to pursue the career and to know just by hearing that sonification, that people want them in this community, that they're welcome here, that people are working to make sure that they can experience that sense of wonder that will make them want to be a part of this scientific community.
That's really cool. I'm thinking now too about the way that the data is represented as sounding celestial and things. That's almost who was the first? I'm wondering who the first person was that started to make the sonifications of the space data. I would imagine they were likely sighted, and they were taking that feeling they have and communicating that through sound, which is now like translated through a human, through the technology, back into wonder for you to experience and all the next generation coming up.
I think that's one of my favorite things about sonification that you've sort of just touched on, is that it's such an incredible opportunity for cross-discipline collaboration, because you don't just have astronomers working on sonification. You have musicians, you have psychologists who understand how we interpret sound, you have sound engineers, you have all these different people who have to sort of work together to make a sonification that is not only faithful to the data, but is also enjoyable. It captures the feelings that we want it to. I would be remiss in talking about astronomical sonification without mentioning Kate Meredith and Glass Education, an incredible nonprofit that organizes a monthly sonification world chat, where people from all over the world talk about sonification, and it is not just astronomers, it is people from all different disciplines. It's very exciting. I think sometimes us scientists get a little stuck in our bubbles of hard sciences, and it's exciting to get to collaborate with artists and sound engineers and psychologists who have perspectives on how to make sonifications better than we could ever make them. Just a bunch of astronomers sitting in a room, clacking away at a keyboard.
Right on. Yeah, it's important to have the qualitative aspects of our work available to us, right? The environment that we work in is important. So always having that connection to wonder and to having that connection to the kind of magic that is qualitative that as we're studying the quantitative. So I think we might be ready to open up for questions.
Sounds
Does that
good.
sound good?
Yeah.
All right. Yeah, I think we're ready. So we can open it up. Are there any questions from the audience on sonification plants or space, or like where we're going, what's happening? All right. I see a hand over here. I'll repeat your question. You can just feel. Who's setting the harmonics and the limits, like the scaling and that stuff with the plants?
Right, with both the plants and in this case, the image, the astronomical image, because, I mean, it's so beautiful. Clearly, there was some thought put into making sure that the harmonics work despite whatever frequency is being activated.
100%. Yeah, I can give a little on the plant side. So I'm the guy. I made those decisions in the PlantWave app. I've been working on it for 11 years. I've developed a sonification practice and a framework. I can give you a little insight on that. So there are a few kind of core values with it. One core value is the value of harmony. So the value of harmony is that if something sounds nice, people are going to spend more time with it. If you're looking to observe data over a long period of time, whether it's with your eyes or with your ears, you got to make sure it's non-fatiguing, right? So value of harmony, then I say, okay, pentatonic scales. So everything's always scaled to a pentatonic key. That way, no matter what order the notes are played, it always stays kind of harmonious. The next thing is that, the next aspect is to provide multiple levels of resolution of the data all at once. And so you can do that with multiple instruments. So people will comment on a Instagram post or something, and they'll be like, yeah, cool, that orchid sounds great, but like I wish you'd remove the piano, because like I was just trying to listen to the plant, because it's like maybe piano, bass, and like whatever. It's like the plant is controlling multiple instruments, and so they've missed the fact that it's all being represented of the plant. But yeah, providing different resolutions of the data as music. So you might have the bass is allowed to be triggered once every 10 seconds. So you're getting the change over time on the you're getting a change over every 10 seconds on the bass instrument. Whereas maybe marimba or something that's way more staccato, you're getting a finer level of resolution. So that's why with PlantWave, we have 4 different instruments that the plant can play all at one time. And so you're hearing the same data, but at different resolutions. And together, it ends up sounding like a symphony. So those are 2. So harmony, providing different levels of resolution. The third one is providing insight into like large changes, like allowing novel events to be very clearly novel events. So so we designed for that by the notes are generated by the change in conductivity. So you can think of that as like a lie detector, and the lie detector wave. Imagine that wave. It's funny because it's the same circuitry basically. So the lie detector wave. Imagine that being translated into pitch, right? But then imagine that lie detector wave goes from something that's like a really low frequency, so the wave's really long, to something really high, really fast. So like there's a huge velocity in the change. So an event like that with PlantWave or with our sonification system would change a knob, which can be mapped to one of many things. You think of knob in your car stereo or something as volume, but a knob could also be turning up the reverb. A knob could make it so that the sample rate becomes faster and it's able to trigger more notes faster. So we're using CC messages, which is a MIDI. MIDI is musical instrument digital interface. It's like a computer language for synthesizers. So we're using the MIDI CC signal to represent changes in activity. So you're hearing a lot. There's a lot of information there when you're listening with a PlantWave, and we're trying to make it as easy to listen to for as long as possible, so that you can be with the data for those emergent happenings of large changes in the delta. So that's how we approach it, and then we're also applying that to other, we're applying that to wearable data and things like that. So we have some patents related to that. That's the bigger thing for Data Garden moving forward. Beyond PlantWave is using that same kind of sonification engine to make real-time biofeedback music for wellness, for meditation, for exercise, high-intensity interval training, all these things. And, our lead developer, Carl, over here, has been amazing at, ensuring that we're building it in a way that, that it can scale. And, yeah, we've developed a language, and so I think there are different languages maybe for different, there's a different language maybe for biological systems in real time that have to recalibrate than the language that's used for sonification. But that's how we're doing it. I'd love to hear more on your side.
Yeah, so unfortunately, I am not the guy who does that. So I don't know if I'll be able to give you as in-depth an answer there. What I can tell you is that oftentimes for especially these outreach sonifications, we use real musical instruments, which will set, some limits on the pitches just based on what instruments the noises they can make, and that's because that's aesthetically pleasing to the ear. A lot of effort goes into making sure that things are aesthetically pleasing. As you said, people won't listen to or look at things that they find grating, and that's where a lot of our collaboration with sound engineers and musicians comes in terms of, here's our, we don't have live data, so we know what the brightest and the dimmest point is. So how do we map that onto a range of pitches that is broad enough that you can hear the differences, but narrow enough that we're not getting to any pitches that are absolutely miserable to listen to? In terms of, some sonifications that are maybe more research oriented, when maybe we're not using instruments, in that case, again, still a lot of thought goes into sort of default pitches that are used to map things, again, so it isn't painful to the ears of whatever poor astronomer is listening to it. And a lot of that comes down to usability testing. A lot of testing, which definitely needs to include blind and visually impaired people for best results, because we're good at listening to things. But so a lot of usability testing, and then sometimes, including, I believe, with Astronify, because you can make your own sonifications of your own data with things like Astronify, you, I believe, have some control over the pitch range. So maybe if you need to modify the pitch range so you can hear something else, you as the user, I believe, have the option to do that. At the very least, with Astronify, you have the option to invert the pitches, like invert color on your phone. You can invert the pitches so higher points on a line graph, brighter moments for the star, will actually be lower pitches. And that's all in terms of making things more usable, making things more pleasant. And again, that comes down to a lot of usability testing. So again, another wonderful opportunity for collaboration, not only with musicians, but now with astronomers, with the blind and visually impaired community, to include us in the creation of these tools that will help them. That idea of like nothing about us without us.
Yeah, great question. And yeah, along with that, there is there's also this kind of like spacing between the notes. We arpeggiate things just to make it so that it has more of a time feel. Sometimes it's not. I know that with a lot of the sonification stuff for NASA, a lot of times it's not, because you want to know precisely where the star is or where that thing is on the image, right?
Yeah, so in these sonifications we listen to, so these like compact sources like stars, like little points of light, those would be a single note. Whereas other things are sort of like more of a wave, I don't know, like how do I describe this? I don't know, more interconnected points of notes, I suppose. Something like Astronify is a bit different. I likened it in one interview to like a glissando on a piano, where you like run your hand down the piano and you like hit every key. You can still hear the individual notes, but they sort of blend together. It doesn't sound like a piano, but it sort of has that feel of, we hit individual notes because they're individual points on this line graph. It's not a continuous line. It's like each individual observation. So we hit individual notes, but they all sort of blend together in something that gives you a good picture of the continuous whole. So yeah, it's interesting to think about how all of these aspects of the sonification play together. The pitches, the spacing between notes, how loud it is, how all of these things interplay to give us a comprehensible image, quote unquote.
Right on. Thanks for that. We have another question over here.
Yes, hi. My name is Honey. Thank you both for sharing your practice and your findings so concisely and generously with us. I'm really interested in playing with sonification, and I'm wondering what tools are available to us lay people to collect and translate data for sonification, and probably most particularly for biofeedback, since we are the instrument that we have available.
Sure. So for biofeedback sonification, we have PlantWave for plants. You could technically use PlantWave on your body in a way. We have another, like an alternate firmware version we might release eventually that will allow for more of that kind of thing. We started experimenting with sonifying breath patterns and things like that. We're working on connecting our sound engine to different wearable devices. There's nothing out there right now. And honestly, I don't think that right now there's a market for it, which is great because we're building it that's what we want to do. We want to build the market for it. Like, we just feel like this is something that we want in our lives. But there's nothing really out there commercially that does sonification. There's a lot of Arduino projects you can find to play around with things. But I don't know of anything right now on the market that's doing direct sonification in that way. Most of it is like, even with the biofeedback devices, you get, it might unlock certain sounds, or you might get little birds if you're wearing a Muse headband or something like that, but not in the same way of like the real-time direct biofeedback music. Do you know of any?
Certainly not in the realm of biofeedback, I'm sorry to say, a little outside my wheelhouse. There are certain astronomical tools that will let you do your own sonification, one of them being Astronify, another being Sono Uno, but these are primarily for astronomical data, and I will say I don't know how accessible they are to lay people. For instance, Astronify will require you to know how to program in Python. I would say if you're interested in getting into this kind of thing, I would definitely point you at the Sonification World Chat, again, hosted by Glass Education, and you can get a lot of different perspectives, not just from astronomers, but from people sonifying all sorts of data. So that's probably where I'd point you as a starting point. Unfortunately, it's not a tool, it's just a community.
Thank you. Who else has a question?
Awesome. We have the sonification of this ending soon with bagpipes, I think, but we still have like 5 minutes left. So go for it.
Hi. I'm Caroline from Australia. Thank you for your talk. I was just wondering, like, sonification's been around for quite a long time, and it seems to me, I think I bombarded you a bit the other day when I first met you because I was so excited this was here. It seems to me that it's not still taken very seriously. And what do you think that emerging tech might bring to that conversation and change things?
Yeah, I think one of the biggest challenges is actual, like, audio literacy in general. It's like, to me, it's like a media literacy problem. And we're such a visual culture. And so, to me, the biggest challenge, so the question was really, to me, the biggest challenge is that there's a lot of room for humans of post-industrial societies to step into learning how to listen. And that's part of what I'm looking to do with PlantWave, is like, we're creating this thing where some people walk up and they hear it and they're just like, I don't know, it's just playing the same music it was playing before. I hook up this plant, it's playing the same things when I hook it up to that plant. And it's because they're like, oh, it's the same instruments. I thought it would be like a totally different band if I hooked it up to this versus that. But there's even sometimes if you say, well, do you notice that the flute isn't playing now and that it's it's in the same key, but this isn't happening? I feel like it's like listening literacy. And it's really easy for us musicians and folks to think, oh, why, like, how hasn't this taken off? And the reason is that people need to be educated because this is a tool that you need to learn how to use. It's like riding a bike or anything. And for us musicians, it's easy. For people that are like hyper intuitive, it's easy. But if it's somebody that's like really super analytical that isn't into as many of the qualitative aspects of being a human being, there's going to be, and unfortunately, some of those people are the ones that are making the decisions of what gets funded and what doesn't get funded, because they're looking for the hockey stick graph on the investment and all that.
Don't you think it could certainly, one of its first uses could be, in areas where people are looking at whole systems or listening to whole systems, like cybersecurity has a lot of anomalies in the system. And if you're someone who listens to that on a daily basis, and you could hear those distinctions when something might go awry.
I've thought about that too. That's a great point. I think that for those systems, though, they might not need a human to listen to it. They have the AI in place for the other aspects of the system to manage itself. I think its greatest potential is really in allowing people to connect more deeply to their own bodies through biofeedback music. And I'm sure there are going to be other areas too. We'll find out. Yeah. Do you have anything you'd like to add?
Yeah, it's interesting. I think we come at this from very different perspectives, which makes, at Sonification from very different perspectives and backgrounds, which makes things interesting. I think within the scientific community, it's not so much an issue of it not being taken seriously, because people are generally very receptive to this idea of sonification, so much as it not, as you said, being mainstream. There isn't sonification available or sonification tools available for everything that we use in astronomy. And outside of the actual sonification community itself, there's not much of a push for there to be tools. From my perspective, I think the biggest solution to that is going to be inclusion. I am, one blind person, one of, mind you, a relatively small number of blind people in the scientific community calling for these changes to be made. And it's hard for things to become mainstream when you have, 5, 10 blind astronomers in the entire world. I don't know how many there actually are, but not many. So I think I often talk about this idea of a snowball effect. Something like the sonifications we played for you are going to inspire more blind people to become astronomers. And the more of us there are, the more of a push there will be for more sonifications. It will become more mainstream. You'll see more blind astronomers in the field still. You'll get more sonifications, and eventually there will be so many of them that it will be mainstream, not just for blind people, but for the whole community. We have all sorts of things that started out as accessibility tools and eventually just became so popular that they're universal. For instance, I talked about invert colors on your phone, or dark mode. How many of you guys like dark mode? That was initially a visual accommodation for people with various reading or sight issues. Eventually, when you have enough people with disabilities pushing for these changes, they become mainstream. And people start to see that actually, again, this accessible, universal design is better for everyone.
I love that. That's so wonderful. There are so many different ways that our systems are configured, right? As human beings, we all have different hardware here, and all of our hardware is configured specifically for our highest contribution as humans and as individuals. And the more that we can create ways for human beings to fully express themselves and fully engage in the world around us, the better it's going to be for everyone, because everybody has like a really unique gift. And I'm really glad, it's really great to have met you and to hear about sonification from your perspective. And it does feel really promising, also to use this technology to really illuminate deeper connection with the universe and our solar system and galaxies and ourselves, our own bodies, and the natural world around us. So thanks so much. I think we're going to close out because we have a party that's rolling right into this place. But we'll be around here. Thank you so much for attending, and go on upstairs to the Plant Music Lounge. It's such a zone. It's such a good space. So, and meanwhile, I guess let's check this out. Peace. Thank you.